Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues and partners. I want to do just a mic test. Can we hear me okay? Okay. So if you'll just allow me a second to turn off all of my notifications so they don't distract. All right, let's get started. So thank you so much for being here. It's really a privilege to welcome you to this discussion and paper launch on adapting to climate change in the most vulnerable contexts. As we all know, climate change is a development challenge that demands innovative, inclusive, and evidence-based solutions. Today, our distinguished panelists will share insights from their experiences. This is an opportunity to hear the lessons that the Independent Evaluation Office has pulled together from over 37 UNDP evaluations on programming and climate change, and to learn from diverse UNDP experiences in Eswatini and Peru to explore practical and effective strategies that bridge policy and implementation. This paper launch is the latest in a series of reflection papers that the Independent Evaluation Office has undertaken to highlight lessons from across evaluative work at UNDP. So please allow me to introduce you to our speakers. They should all have their cameras on. Ben Murphy, he is an evaluation specialist at UNDP's Independent Evaluation Office. We have Megaliso Mohammed, who is the Sustainable Development Specialist at UNDP Eswatini. And we have Diana Rivera, Head of Environment and Energy at UNDP Peru. And I'm Janice Grajczowski, Chief of the Capacity Development Section at Independent Evaluation Office and the moderator for today's discussion. So we will have time after a short round of presentations to get the conversation going. I encourage you to engage, ask questions, and make this a dynamic conversation. So with that, let's dive right in and hear from our first speaker, Ben, who will be presenting the key evaluation lessons. So if we could have the presentation pulled up now. Thanks. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Janice, and morning or afternoon to all of you. Nice to see so many people here with us. So
just a moment here, Ben, we can't hear your...
You can't hear me at all?
Do we want to do a mic check on Ben?
Can anyone else hear you,
Ben?
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I cannot hear Ben. Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that, everyone. Perfect. Okay. Go ahead, Ben. I'll just follow along. Thanks.
Thanks. So I'll just give you a brief overview of this paper. As Janice mentioned, it sits within the IEO's reflection series. And this is one that we have just produced. It's been in work over the past year. But essentially, if we could go to the next slide, Alice, we have brought together from this series that, has used the IEO's Evaluation Resource Center, which has a housing for over 7,000 evaluations, and dug into specific topics relating to adaptation. And that paper, I'm about to show you on the next slide, is focusing on reflections in vulnerable contexts, specifically what has worked to promote adaptation in these contexts. So we've brought here is quite recent evidence. Most of the lessons are drawn from the last 3 to 4 years, a few slightly older than that, but most of it from either country evaluations that the IEO has performed or project evaluations. Many of those project evaluations are under the GEF support or through the Adaptation Fund or for the GCF. So there's a good sense of both kind of what this looks like at a country level, but also specifically how projects are making a difference. And as Janice mentioned, we have 37 reports that are in here and a whole kind of host of countries covered. And it was through a systematic search of that evidence base that I mentioned. And if anybody wants to know a bit more about how we did that, I'm happy to say it. If anybody hasn't seen the paper yet and would like to, there's a QR code there. And we'll repeat that QR code a bit later in the presentation. Just before I come to the main lessons of the the main lessons of the paper, I'm just going to give you a sense of kind of from UNDP side what the programming looks like. On the next slide is more details about UNDP's climate promise. I'm not going to be able to do justice to this because it is a large portfolio of work. It's in over 100 countries, and over half of those are least developed countries or small island developing states. And most of them, I imagine, are there with you at the COP, for those that are at the COP. And what UNDP does through this support, okay, part of the climate promise is on mitigation, but what we've looked at is the adaptation work. And the UNDP is there supporting kind of national and subnational adaptation plans, supporting the nationally determined contributions to the UNFCCC, and also the planning and the financing that's required to get those NDCs into practice. And then as a complement to this, it also works at the local level, coming up with innovative solutions for the most vulnerable populations. So from this programming, on the next slide, we have come up with 7 lessons from the synthesis process. And these cover all things really, from the nature of the climate impacts that we're seeing in recent evaluations, including, I should add, which was a new find, at least for me personally, was, climate change impacts having a destabilizing effect on the solutions that UNDP and others were trying to implement. But it covers a whole host of things, including climate information, the national planning, also the private sector involvement, which I know has been a challenging area, and my colleague Mangaliso from Eswatini will talk a little bit more about those. And there's also a lesson on evaluating climate resilience and the observations that we had looking at these 37 evaluation reports, and where projects are, or where evaluations are getting certain things right and certain things, focusing on things to a lesser extent in when they're looking at resilience building. So I'd encourage you all to take a look at the paper for a deeper look. For now, I'm just going to take us through 3 or 4 of these lessons. I should firstly say, the paper is intentionally about vulnerable contexts and adaptation here in these contexts. And for that, in the examples that we looked at, there are vulnerable countries, but then also within those countries, there are particularly vulnerable contexts. Often when, people are living on marginal lands or beyond the reach of effective public service or private sector interests. And that's why, if we could skip to the next slide, Alice, that's why the paper kind of emphasizes and leads with a finding on local capacities, because it's these that are deployed first in the event of a hazard. And importantly, to minimize this component of uncertainty around climate risks. I think as a lot of people will know, getting that granular level information down to an understanding about what it might mean for a specific area has been a challenge. And so one of the ways to overcome that is to support the local capacities to have that information, but also to be able to utilize it. These projects, and I think of the ones we looked at, the most positive ones are where UNDP has worked at this local level to create climate maps and use these to link to formal support. And there are good examples of Peru, Uganda, and Nepal where this has really happened. And these approaches acknowledge that yes, people may live in vulnerable contexts, but they also have the best understanding of that context, and also a lot of experience of how to deal with hazards and uncertainties. Perhaps now with climate change, that knowledge is being tested and more. But there's a lot that can be done by harnessing this into local plans. And I think my colleague Deanna will speak a little bit more about this from the perspective of Indigenous people shortly after this presentation. So the stronger programs have developed this into local plans, which has also been a good opportunity to formalize awareness of climate change as a future threat, and to use these plans to, say, link to social protection, as happened in Peru, or agricultural extension, or even climate information services. Because the plans encapsulate or express a community contribution, perhaps to ecosystem management or to building defensive infrastructure, these can also be used to leverage other payments for ecological services perhaps, or climate insurance. I think that's more on a trial basis, but it has been done because the community has said what they how they will work in their local landscape to perhaps reduce risks or to improve conservation outcomes. Obviously, this is the way we frame it in the paper, is an entry point rather than a silver bullet for adaptation. And one of the challenges that with this approach, or one of the things to bear in mind, is that some evaluations have highlighted that at that local level, the scale of immediate needs may be huge, and opening up this discussion and this kind of participatory approach can yield a whole array of things that need to be addressed today. And in that kind of immediacy and the scale, the unique and the future risks of climate change can be a little deprioritized or pushed from the fore of the thinking. So those evaluations have encouraged programmers to it's not a great word, but to promote an adaptive mindset within the plan. So I think what that means is that it's rather than, say, focusing on establishing a single and perhaps potentially time-bound solution, that the plan should look at a diversity of options, and also the skills and the information that communities need to choose between different options in the future. It may be, for example, which seeds to use for the coming season, or which livelihoods may be more rewarding based on current market conditions, or perhaps infrastructure that could be modified or as conditions change in the future, or even abandoned. And that leads me to the next slide, because the risk of doing this is captured under kind of lesson 4 on avoiding maladaptation, which is a major unintended consequence of efforts to address climate change through a solely technological lens or an infrastructure lens. And as we can see in some of the evaluations, often for understandable reasons, because programs are trying to address those immediate problems, which may be extreme water shortage or coastal erosion or coastal damage through storms. They're trying to address those and have less focus on the longer term trends and the longer term capacity to adapt. Or perhaps they've worked with a particular locality and not been so aware of what's happening in the wider landscape. Also, quite interestingly, I think what else came out as important is thinking through, as adaptation programs are implemented, how people respond to hazards is an important consideration. For example, there was one project that we looked at the evaluation of that had really put in place a good early warning system for drought. But what was unforeseen is that when that information that in the coming planting season there would be a drought, people then immediately extracted water in the current dry season. So it reduced the water table in advance of the planting season, and was by that measure a particularly unintended consequence in a kind of a semi-arid area. Obviously, kind of what we've talking about so far has been largely at the local level. And Alice, if I could ask you to kind of skip to the next slide. Um, there is a lesson in this finding about, the broader planning process. As I mentioned, UNDP works at the national level down to the local level. And obviously, in very remote areas or very vulnerable contexts, the sustainability of the things that I've spoken about so far, can fall off after the program's closed. So there's a need to get a national response and national financing through to make a more comprehensive and a more sustainable effort on adaptation. And the evaluations, I mean, the ones that we've brought out really do show that this planning is taking place, and that there's more thinking through an improvement of adaptation plans through various iterations. But the implementation in different places, I'm sure as many people know, has faced significant barriers. And part of that barrier is an institutional barrier, getting adaptation action happening between the different ministries that are relevant to addressing it, but also financing challenge as well. So we point to some beyond, not just the challenges, but also some particular solutions in the paper. One way, UNDP has worked with a central economic ministry to make sure that each ministry budgets and plans for climate adaptation. And then secondly, some innovative ways to finance it. In certain countries, we see UNDP building a kind of a portfolio of options or a pipeline of adaptation projects that could be funded. But then it often takes a lot more to actually translate that into action. And so there's work that we've highlighted in this, which is UNDP's work on the bonds, which is some social bonds for conservation. They're not yet in place for adaptation, but they give the principles of how this could be done for adaptation. And similarly, in some countries, Malawi is one of them. There's been work through UNDP's support to integrated national finance frameworks, which is a broad cross-government look at public funding, specifically for new ways, some potentially domestic resourcing for adaptation as well. So these are things that we've highlighted have potential. They would have to move a bit further for them to be the force that unlocks that funding, but there is potential there that could be replicated. I'm going to stop here and hand back to Janice, and then look forward to questions later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ben. It was a great overview of the lessons from the multitude of evaluations we've done over the last number of years on UNDP's work on climate change. And I think now is a good time to have Mangaliso from Eswatini, the UNDP office in Eswatini, talk about the experiences there and to open the discussion to some on-the-ground experience. Over to you, Mangaliso.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I think for us in Eswatini, it's going to be a small country context and how we're facing vulnerability to climate change, but also implementing different mechanisms to adapt. So Eswatini is a small country, a small economy. We are completely surrounded by South Africa, but in the last decade, we have seen our climate vulnerability sort of intensifying, especially when it comes to issues of access to water. Water scarcity is becoming a key issue for Eswatini, and so water resource management is one of those things we have to look at as we are responding in adaptation. So for us, the drought-like conditions are becoming more chronic, but also at the same time, we are experiencing flash floods. So it's managing different weather conditions, but also just making sure that your system is able, your economic system is able to function. So why are we vulnerable? we are an agro-based economy, and especially a lot of our rural communities, their livelihoods are dependent on agriculture. And so when we are facing issues of water scarcity, a lot of people in rural Eswatini are unable to produce. And in fact, in those parts of Eswatini, especially the low veld, that's where a lot of the food production used to happen. But now with the changes in climate, you're finding that productivity is going down, and the amount of food that we're able to do to generate produce as an economy is also going down. Also, interestingly enough, is that our energy system, our electricity, we generate our electricity through hydro-based power. And so when we experience droughts, the water levels go down, and obviously we're unable to generate electricity, and that affects business. And so our climate action is actually a cross between investing in our national economic development agenda, but also making sure that we're able to manage our natural resources in a way that is sustainable, so that we are able to protect the resources, but also use them in a way that they're able to regenerate, and we're able to push productivity forward. And so with the stress on water, we're also experiencing issues, vulnerabilities in terms of degradation of our natural ecosystems, especially in terms of biodiversity management. We've tried to work in a lot of protection of our wetlands, so that we can have the water regeneration. But as well, you have a lot of rural households that are dependent on fuel wood, and that is coming from our natural from our forests. And so that's also another issue that we need to work on. We can move on to the next slide. So as UNDP, we support the government of Eswatini using a four-pronged approach when it comes to the issues of climate change. First of all, it's to ensure that within Eswatini we have a robust early warning system so that we can do the weather forecasting, but also at the same time have scientists, have experts in place that can do the climate modeling over a long period of time. And so with support that we have received from the government of Italy, for example, we've been able to procure supercomputers for our Met department to do advanced climate forecasting as well as modeling. We also have automated weather stations installed across the country so that we can generate that kind of information. We are also working with our biodiversity stakeholders to ensure that we're protecting our wetlands, but not only focusing on the protection, but also just making sure that we can also derive livelihoods out of those. So ecotourism, and just making sure that people in those settings are able to use the natural resources for their livelihoods, because we think that is key. We need to support micro, small, and medium enterprises development so that a bigger share of our population can be engaged in income generating activities, so that they can build savings and they can have options in terms of adapting to shocks in the economy, but also to the climate related shocks that we experience as an economy. And then again, we have a big energy program where we are trying to decarbonize the MSME sector, the business sector, but also just making sure that we are able to generate electricity using renewable energy technologies, solar, biomass, as well as a wind, among other technologies. And so this is another program where it takes time, and the cost of installation, the cost of adoption is also something that we need to look at, because businesses are concerned about the bottom line. And so if you are if you're coming with an added cost, the issue of adoption becomes major, because they want to see immediate returns as soon as they adopt that technology. Yet we know adaptation takes time, and it takes time for people to be resilient to the issues of climate change. And then overall, I think for us, we understand that the vulnerability, the issues of climate change are actually sometimes contributing to a regress in our socioeconomic development progress that we have made. When these catastrophic weather events happen, you find that they push communities further into poverty, and then it makes us regress in the development strides that we have been able to take as an economy. And so a key challenge that we are trying to overcome is how do we bring in the private sector to participate in investment, for example, in the wetland restoration programs, but also the catchment investment program that we have, because as we know, private sector is concerned with the bottom line. They want to increase profits, they want sales. And so if you are asking them to invest rather than see the programs that we're doing as charity-based contributions to our work, that becomes something that we really need to work on, a lot of convincing and a lot of sort of engagement with the private sector to ensure that they can see the natural resources as inputs of their production processes. And so it's in their interest to ensure that the wetlands are able to generate the water so that they have the water to do their processes in agriculture, in manufacturing, etc., etc. But also we can move on to the next slide, where overall I think the biggest lesson for us is that the issue of resilience, it's a combination of many factors. And so I don't think you can quickly get to a point where you can say households or the economy is completely resilient to the issue of drought, for example, in Eswatini. Yes, we generate the information through the early warning systems, but to move, to transition from information to action on the ground, it becomes difficult for the different stakeholders. When a drought comes and you want your farmers to manage their livestock, when you want them to sell the livestock and maintain a small number, that becomes an issue, because for them, they like to hold a large stock of livestock. And then also, I think the issue of attribution versus contribution in terms of the work that we're doing, as I said, a lot of factors involved. You address one issue, another dynamic comes into play. And so it's a changing dynamic. And when the storms come, it's not always the same. We install our energy, renewable energy systems, for example, solar plants. The hailstorm comes, it destroys the panels. We move back a bit. And so those are the issues we need to be able to work with, but also just making sure that we're building stakeholder confidence in the adaptation processes that we are putting in place. And so for us in Eswatini, it's been a privilege. And I think that is what we can contribute as our key lessons in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mangaliso. And I'm happy to pass the mic over to our next presenter, Diana Rivera from the UNDP office in Peru, to share the experiences from this country here. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you. It's an honor to take part in this webinar on climate change adaptation and to share the experience that is meaningful for UNDP here in Peru. In your ecological restoration led by Cacatayo and Citibo indigenous movement. It is linked with building local capacity, but I would like to say that learning from local capacity, as we are going to see. Next, please. In the Peruvian Amazon, mostly for indigenous people, adaptation is not a new idea. It is a way of life, really. It is how indigenous people have sustained their livelihood, culture, and territories to face environmental changes and external pressures. Between 2022 and 2025, UNDP, together with the organization CIMA and local communities, support a process of ecological restoration in the territories of the Cacatayo and Citibo people. in the buffer zone on the Cordillera Sur National Park. This is a fragmented area by deforestation, burning, soil degradation, and the landscape became a space to show that ecological restoration is an ecosystem-based adaptation strategy, but also a social process rooted in indigenous identity and governance. Next, please. But with the but what made this experience really special is that science did come not to replace the tradition. It came to dialogue with her. Landscape connectivity analysis, ecological indicators, and spatial tools came together with ancestral knowledge about soils, secondary forest, and regeneration cycles. So, when technical and cultural knowledge met, restoration moved forward with more precision and legitimacy. Next, please. But what I want to highlight is one essential aspect, the role of indigenous women. In this community, women did not only plant trees, they redefined the very meaning of restoration. As artisans, mothers, and leaders, they identify native species and that not only help recover the ecosystems, but also strengthen cultural practices seeds for handicraft, dried plants, traditional fillers, and medicinal species. Their participation expanded the vision of restoration and turned it into an act of cultural continuity, knowledge transmission, and intergenerational care. By, by bringing their knowledge into the process, restoration stopped being in only ecological effort and became a comprehensive strategy that supports livelihood, revitalizes identities, and strengthens resilience to climate change. Next, please. And what we learn about this experience? We learn first that indigenous peoples are key partners for ecosystem-based adaptation. Their understanding of the territory allows them to anticipate risks, monitor changes, and design more effective responses that isolated external interventions. Second, ecological restoration is a concrete form of climate adaptation. Geological corridors reduce the vulnerability to wildfires, protect water sources, and restore essential ecosystem services for food security and community well-being. And the last one is that climate adaptation is stronger when it includes human leadership. Their perspectives expand the ecological, cultural, and economic benefits and strengthen community cohesion, which is essential for long-term adaptation. Today, with the Amazon becoming more and more fragmented and climate events growing more extreme, these communities show us a better way. Adaptation cannot be imposed, it must be built with people. It grows from local knowledge, networks of solidarity, the strength of women, territorial memory, and the connection with the forest. At UNDP Peru, we reaffirm our commitment to nature-based solutions, to supporting indigenous leadership, and promoting gender equality as key part of our response to climate crisis. Because the lands that indigenous people have protected for generations are now our strongest base to adapt climate change. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. And thank you to all of the presenters this morning, this afternoon. I'm wondering if we could have the presentation removed and have our faces back on the floor so we can have a discussion now. Picking up on a number of the cross-cutting issues and ideas that have come across all three presentations. Two of the things that really struck me, and I think Dr. Hassan has mentioned it in the chat in one of the questions raised, was the idea of the connection or the opportunity to connect local expertise, local needs and knowledge with national planning. And it'd be interesting to hear from the speakers a little bit more about, how to actually do that, and what are the opportunities to sort of take local, to respond to local local needs, but then also how do you bridge the sort of national the national requirements to adapt and to plan with the overall picture. So I'll hand that over to you, which is really one of the questions that was raised by Dr. Hassan as well, which is how should climate adaptation policies, how can we, where are we? It was the link between local adaptation and national plans.
Yeah, maybe I could come in first on this, Janice. I think across those first three findings in the paper, there's some good examples there. And this is why we kind of started with this finding around the local planning process. And perhaps Mangalisa and Diana have more specifics about this in their countries, but because it encapsulates, a contextual and assessment of current risks that are happening with community experiences about what's been happening over the past 10, 20 years, then I think that is quite an important way to encapsulate, a first kind of marriage between planning processes and community expertise. Then the second finding, or the third, lesson in this paper is around climate information, which Mangalisa spoke about. And the lesson there, which I didn't go into, was that it needs to be that two-way process between, quite specific technical scientific analyses of meteorological analyses with that community level observation and finding a language that talks between the two, because often science or scientific journals and research doesn't incorporate indigenous knowledge particularly well, or speak to things that are being observed at that level. I think there's a role in between the two for programs or for adaptation practitioners to help kind of push push the thinking towards the future and towards not just what has been observed in the past and what might be experienced at the moment in terms of drought or flooding or whatever happens to be, but to say, okay, so if this, if these trends repeat, what are some strategies that you might deploy? If this doesn't manifest, if you actually end up receiving a lot more rainfall or erratic rainfall compared to what you're planning for, what might be some strategies for that as well, and accompanied by some diversification of livelihoods, which I think Mangalisa can speak more about perhaps, into that plan. That plan then becomes a statement of what that community can do, that can then be linked to national processes. I know that Nepal, for example, through its local adaptation planning process, has done a really great job of doing that and connecting it to the national adaptation plan. I don't think all countries have got that far, but I think that is the most I think that's, as a backbone or as a spine to the things that come out. I think that planning process is really helpful. Obviously, there's other issues there in terms of actually building a suitable national response and the financing that's needed for that. But it at least gives you something to work for and to help kind of demonstrate or illustrate what is, for some and for many actually probably in government and the private sector, still a bit of a nebulous concept: adaptation, resilience. You can bring a plan that says this is what we plan to do for 5-10 years. So I'll pause there. I'm sure Mangalisa and Diana have got others.
I can come in. Thank you. Very interesting. I think for us at a macro level, in terms of planning for the economy at large, we have really tried to engage the Ministry of Economic Planning and Development to ensure that they incorporate the issues of sustainability and climate action in their planning processes. And so through UNDP supporting the ministry, we've been able to review our planner's manual, which is the manual that economists or planners across the different ministries use for planning. And so in that, we've been able to infuse sustainability principles, as well as thinking about climate financing to support resilience, but also to climate proof our infrastructure and our economy, so that we are not so hard hit by the economic and weather shocks that we face. It's a process. A lot of the time, people think that the climate issues are just for the Ministry of Tourism and Environment, not for the larger economy as well. And so also, I think the work that we're doing under the biodiversity finance plans is also promoting that, to see that let us budget for the adaptation, let us ensure that we're protecting our natural ecosystems to ensure that they can give us the services that we need, so that at the end of the day, it's a balanced approach to adaptation, but not only just talking about it and planning for it, but also making sure that the finance, the money that we need is available. And then at a grassroots level, I think the small grants program funded by the GEF is also intensifying this idea of ensuring local participation to addressing our development challenges, especially within the environmental sector. And so we've been able to leverage that to ensure intensive participation of our local communities, so that they are at the forefront of providing the solutions to the issues of ecosystem degradation and all the other issues that we're facing, so that they incorporate the indigenous local knowledge that we need to ensure that whatever we're designing is fit for purpose and is effective in the locality that we are implementing it. But overall, again, it's a process. Our national adaptation plan, we have the sectors leading the proposed solutions. Within the energy sector, it's the energy people that are leading the solutions. In agriculture, same thing as well. And overall, we all come together to ensure that we are investing and implementing that national adaptation plan, and participation of the local stakeholders is key. Thank you.
Thanks, Mangaliso. Deanna, did you want to jump in as well, or I'll hand it over to you?
Yeah, here in Peru, rural communities or indigenous communities have a planning instrument that is called life plans. These life plans, we are trying to connect with subnational plans for development. So that subnational plans are linked with national budgets. So through this way, we try to give the money or the budget to make actions to adapt and adapt to climate change. So it's a very hard way to do, but we are trying to do that, connecting the life plan with the subnational plans and the subnational plans with the budget, the national budget. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I want to pose the question to the participants. If you have any questions you want to raise to the speakers, I mean, now's your chance. Just raise your hand and we can have the conversation. Also in the chat, there are a few points that are raised. An interesting comment from Ritu, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, around democratization of data, blend technical knowledge with wisdom in communities, which is the discussion that we've been having. Is there any additional questions from the audience that you would like to talk about with the speakers? Otherwise, I have a ton of questions. And I can maybe, as we're thinking about it, perhaps I can jump right in with another one. You know, feel free, like I said, to engage with our experts here. So this is really around the evaluation itself. Ben, I'll pose this to you, where you reviewed 37 evaluations. And one thing that has struck me as you were talking, and I think as Mangalisa was talking too about framing climate change adaptation within a framework of the economy. This is an economic issue, and climate change supports climate change adaptation supports our economic interests. And I just wondered, it struck me thinking about this, about how did you find evaluations are addressing climate adaptation? And with that, where would you, how would you suggest there could be opportunities to engage in the issue more, not just within climate change programming, but sort of more generally? How do we look at climate change adaptation and evaluations more than just within these sorts of specific projects?
Thanks, Janice. Yeah, so obviously looking through 37 evaluations, it gives a kind of a sense of how evaluators are looking at the topic, and I think there's some good examples and there's some less good examples. I think on the whole, one of the challenges has been when there's a confident statement to say that climate resilience has been built, all communities are now are able to adapt, and I think that's often on the basis of a single indicator, like the adoption of climate smart seeds, or having access to climate information. But I think as Mangaliso put to us, that adaptation is a much longer ongoing process, and you could think that something has been achieved that could easily be wiped out. The issue of the hailstones on the solar panels. I can imagine evaluation saying that that these communities have energy access, but then Mangalisa's just illustrated what might happen further down the road. And I think that's even more problematic when it's an issue like adaptation, because it's not just being able to say, okay, let's get some new solar panels. It's about actually, is there capacity at the local level to deal with a shock? And I think the evaluations that have done that better have actually looked at whether those capacities are in place. Is it an absorptive capacity? Is it adaptive, the ability to choose between different options and to diversify? Or is it an anticipatory one, having more knowledge about what may be on the horizon? When they've looked at the combination of these things, and it tends to be a stronger statement, and tends to be a more, I feel, a more accurate statement about what is happening at that local level. And the good thing about that is that when there has been that kind of a broader lens, you can then, a program could then, or a policy or government could then see, actually, we've supported these capacities, but there's these remaining gaps, or what we've put in place is likely to be enough for maybe the 5 years, but needs to change after that. So on the whole, I think that was one of the main challenges, and I think the way that evaluators can do a better job and be more confident in saying what's happening is to look at it as a set of capacities, and where projects or programs or policies do support those and where they don't. And I think the other component of this, and we talked about this, there's not so much in the paper on this, but there is some thinking around using M&E, or monitoring and evaluation, as a contributor to local understanding of capacities. So that would be kind of communities themselves tracking their capacities, and being able to have a sense of where their capacities are strong or are weak. And I think the good thing about that is not only does it kind of lead into greater knowledge and information, but it's also probably a lighter touch and a more accurate touch than some of the large-scale resilience measurement work that takes place. So I think there's a couple of things that can be replicated. Yeah, I'm sure Mangalisa and Deanna have others as well there.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me. So Ben is coming from an evaluator point of view, but from a user point of view, from an evaluation use point of view, if we could sort of frame that same question around, how do evaluations, or, how do you ensure that you're getting the kind of information that you need when you're working on these issues? So just to sort of speak to Ben's comments around the capacities and these sorts of things, and the way in which we can look at the questions that we want to know. From your point of view, can you add anything to that, to those points? Deanna, Mangaliso, either one, jump right in.
I can come in. I think development is not a straight line. You do not always have control of all the factors. So having clarity on which variables, which factors are you trying to intervene in, or which factors are you trying to change, that's something we need to get a handle on, because while you're doing your intervention, there are other stakeholders that are probably contributing in some way or another to addressing the same issue within that community, or within within your setting. And so the issue of data collection and tracking the changes over time, and the attribution to say, in my intervention, this is what I am directly responsible for, but you need to understand the system as a whole to say there are these many factors, but in my control, this is what I am trying to contribute to. And I appreciate that there are other actors and there are other interventions that are necessary to complete the whole. So it's not easy, it's not a straight line. It's just making sure that you are clear about what you are trying to contribute in.
Okay, from my side, I would like to say that evaluation is a process that is a benefit for everybody. You can learn about what another vision can say you about what you are doing. Sometimes we are so involved in the activities and we don't understand the whole process. So evaluation gives us that opportunity to learn and see the science in other ways, with another side. And when we have the opportunity to share with another project or I don't know, countries, we learn more. And evaluation are a good manner to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we do have, I mean, obviously evaluators have a full toolbox of resources to pull from to help identify these big issues. But it links back to that idea of local knowledge and local context as well. And, meaningful participation in evidence generation as well is important. We have a few minutes left. I see that Dr. Saeed Hassan has added a question to the chat. And this is more of a technical question. So I'll just read it out loud. And if anyone can take an answer to that would be great. How can climate resilience and adaptation strategies be effectively designed and implemented to support farmers from evacuated or displaced communities, ensuring livelihoods are restored and sustained despite the challenges of relocation? So it seems, within the the situation. What are some ways that we can support farmers, to rebuild after a climate crisis?
Yeah, I don't think I have a full answer to this, but perhaps Mangalisa and Diana have more. I just know that there is work that happens. I think the FAO does a lot of work with emergency seeds that farmers can then use that have been displaced, and that can then start to build back a livelihoods if they're really relocated to an area that would allow them to do planting. I know that other NGOs have worked on actually making livelihoods that could be more transportable, and obviously the pastoralist community is a part of their adaptation strategies are to move for pasture and things like that. So I think there are things that can be learned from the ways that people already do it. I don't think there's probably a solid set of programming for doing this, and I think some of the complications around kind of which areas do people move to when they're able to go back to their previous places, what condition their previous place is in. I think all of that raises difficult considerations for programming. But Mangalisa, I know there was some displacement in Eswatini, so is there more you could add to that?
Okay. Thank you. And I'm not the expert in this kind of interventions, but more so, I think it's important that we first think about the immediate support that the displaced communities need, but also just making sure that you're keeping people alive. They have access to the food, but also you're providing the inputs of production that they need to re-engage in agriculture. Obviously, they need access to land, but it depends on the context in each country, how that happens. But also at the same time, could they be integrated with other farming communities, other smallholders, so that they can use their skills, they can use their knowledge to be productive in the food system in the country, not necessarily in their own land, but in spaces where other smallholders are still active and they can contribute to that production so that they can share from that. But in many cases, it's about keeping people alive, making sure you have access to inputs of production, and making sure that they have the tools for them to be able to produce. And if you can, access to markets so that they can generate income out of that production. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not an expert in this matter too, but in my experience working with indigenous people and local communities, I believe that whatever you want to do need to be built with the people, no? Build together and try to connect with solutions, listening what they want to do, and from our side, we can make the connections with another stakeholders to do this situation more easy for the people.
Yeah, I think this is it's an interesting point for us to land on too, right? There is a connection between, responding to immediate needs with a long-term vision when it comes to these very complex and challenging issues being faced in many countries. So I do realize that we are at time. So I do just want to, first of all, thank everyone for being a part of this conversation. And to thank our colleagues at the UNDP offices in Peru and Eswatini for lending their experience and expertise, I will say, on this topic, and to Ben and to the whole team at IEO who has been putting together these reflection papers, with this being the latest reflection paper. They're a really great resource where you can quickly see lessons coming from many of our evaluation work. And so I encourage all of you to take a look at the UNDP IEO Independent Evaluation Office website for more information and more insights into our reflections on evaluation work. And on that note, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mangaliso. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everyone who came today. We look forward to carrying on the discussion in the future.